New York morning rush hour. The avenues teemed with activity. A young black woman, a delivery driver, expertly navigated the dense traffic, rushing to complete her final delivery. The earnings were crucial for her ailing mother's medication. Nearby, an elderly gentleman stumbled and fell, a speeding taxi bearing down on him. Without a moment's hesitation, she abandoned her delivery, sprinted into the street and shielded him with her own body. This singular, selfless act cost her a full day's earnings and her mother's vital medicine. What she didn't yet grasp was that the man she had rescued was the father of her company's CEO, and the ensuing events would irrevocably alter her life. New York at 8 a.m. was not for the faint of heart. The streets vibrated with raw energy, unyielding, metallic. Horns blared unapologetically. Steam coiled from subway grates, the very breath of the city. Footsteps clicked in unison as if guided by an unseen maestro. Between glass behemoths that gleamed like polished obsidian and the frantic pulse of rush hour, little could compel a soul to pause. Yet, on the corner of 56th and Madison, amidst this orchestrated pandemonium, something profoundly human quietly began to unfold. Amamira, 28, piloted her electric delivery scooter with the finesse of a seasoned mariner cutting through a tempest. Her branded jacket, slightly worn at the seams, bore the Flash Feast logo. Her messenger bag bulged with the morning's last order. A breakfast wrap and a chai latte for a midtown executive who'd specified extra hot thrice. 5 minutes remained on her timer and it offered no quarter. Her mother's voice from a voicemail still faintly echoed in her earbuds. "The meds will help, but they're not cheap, baby. Don't worry, I'll be okay." It was a falsehood. Her mother was not okay. Amamira knew this, and she rode like one compelled to make every delivery count for more than just tips. Each journey was a step toward maintaining power, ensuring medication flow and keeping unspoken dread at bay. Across the intersection, Mr. Walters stood with a posture that was not quite assured, yet not entirely fragile. He was 87, his winter coat buttoned fully despite the gentle warmth of early spring. His cane, a well-used decades-old piece of carved mahogany, rested carefully in his right hand. His eyes, still keen beneath his gray flat cap, surveyed the crosswalk as the light prepared to change. He was a retired professor, the sort who once held forth in ivy-clad lecture halls, quoting Whitman and Baldwin without notes. Today, however, he was simply a man yearning to sit on his favorite park bench and inhale the city's essence. He owned no phone, never perceiving the need, and had left his wallet behind, believing this outing would be precisely that. A simple stroll. The crosswalk signal flashed to walk. Mr. Walters stepped off the curb with a vigor he hadn't mustered in years, determined to reach the other side before the light shifted. But the concrete betrayed him. His cane slipped first, then his footing gave way and in an instant he was down on one knee, then fully sprawled on the asphalt. Cars braked sharply. Tires shrieked. A horn wailed, long and piercing. A foot, then another, paused mere inches from his hand. The city did not cease its motion. It never did. But for a fleeting moment, it wavered, hesitated, as if deliberating whether to consume him whole or grant a reprieve. Amamira witnessed his fall. She was mid-turn, halfway across the intersection, when her gaze fixed on the figure collapsed on the pavement. For a breathless second she performed a mental calculation. The app's timer, the order's payout, the precarious tightrope of survival she traversed daily. Then she slammed her brakes. Her scooter skidded sideways, tilting slightly, and she was already sprinting. Not walking, not checking her phone, just running. "Hold on, sir," she cried as she darted between idling vehicles. A cab driver cursed at her, but she didn't hear it. She crouched beside Mr. Walters, instinctively shielding him with outstretched arms, her body forming a barrier against the impatient world. "You're okay. I've got you," she said, her voice calm but urgent. The kind of voice that speaks truth even when the world denies it. He blinked up at her, dazed but conscious. His cane lay in 2 pieces beside him like broken wings. His hands trembled, not from fear but from the indignity of weakness, the mortification of being on the ground before so many strangers. "I was just trying to make it across," he murmured. "Didn't want to be in anyone's way." "You're not in anyone's way," Amamira said softly, taking one arm then the other. "We've all got time to care. We just forget." Together they moved slowly, her shoulder beneath his, guiding him gently out of the street and toward the bench just beyond the curb. She didn't care that the delivery timer had expired. She didn't care that her entire day's effort would likely go uncompensated. What mattered was the trembling man beside her, his breathing ragged, his pride shaken. As she eased him onto the bench, her own knees nearly buckled, not from exhaustion, but from the sudden, sobering awareness of fragility, his and hers. "Do you need to call someone?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, just needed some air. I miss walking." He chuckled sadly, then winced. "Guess the city doesn't miss me back." She sat beside him for a moment, observing the rushing people, the light changing again, the city's rhythm resuming as if nothing had occurred. But something had. Something small and imperceptible to most. A kindness, a moment of stillness, a choice made in 3 seconds that declared, people matter more. He looked at her, studying her face with an intensity only a teacher could summon. "You have a rare heart," he whispered. "I hope you never forget that." She didn't respond, simply nodded quietly as people do when words are too meager for the feeling swelling within. Amamira felt her phone buzzing again, insistently, rhythmically, like a ticking clock she could no longer afford to ignore. She glanced at it once. Delivery failed. Penalty applied. Customer complaint filed. She tucked it away without a word. The numbers no longer held significance. The man beside her, now steadying his breath, mattered far more. Mr. Walters adjusted his cap with trembling fingers and leaned slightly forward, his gaze fixed on the cracked cement underfoot, as if trying to comprehend how he'd ended up there, in the middle of a street he had crossed 1,000 times in his youth without hesitation or fear. The humiliation hung thick around him like a coat too heavy for spring. Amamira watched him, noting the way he clutched his side, the way his lips pressed together in stubborn dignity. She saw it plainly. He didn't want to ask for assistance, didn't want to be perceived as someone in need. She reached down and picked up the broken cane, examining the clean snap where years of pressure had finally taken their toll. She tested its weight in her hands and knew instantly there would be no mending it. It was done. She hesitated, then crouched before him, holding the broken halves gently in her palms. "This has seen a lot of miles," she said softly, offering him a smile that was more apology than observation. "Looks like it finally gave out." He looked at the cane, then at her, and something in his face shifted. Not shame, not regret, but the quiet ache of a man who had always been the one helping others, now forced to accept the reversal of roles. "It was a gift from my wife," he said, his voice barely audible above the city's hum. "She gave it to me when my niece started reminding me they had been through wars I never fought. She passed 10 years ago. I guess the cane held on longer than either of us expected." Amamira's breath caught in her throat. She glanced around the park. Children squealing on swings, joggers passing by without pause, pigeons scattering and regrouping in perfect indifference to the two of them. Life carried on, relentless and unsentimental. But she felt rooted in place by something heavier, something sacred in this ordinary bench. She stood slowly, dusted off her knees and said without thinking, "Wait here. I'll be right back." He opened his mouth to protest, but she was already walking briskly toward the small pharmacy across the street. She moved with purpose, dodging pedestrians and ignoring the new delivery ping that illuminated her phone. Inside the store she found the canes stacked near the back, rows of them, all impersonal and sterile, until her eyes caught one made of dark polished walnut, slightly curved at the top with a rubber grip and a soft, shock-absorbing base. It was the most expensive one on the rack. She didn't even hesitate. At the counter she unfolded the cash she'd hidden in a sock at the bottom of her delivery bag. $73, the exact amount she had earned working 14 hours the day before. The clerk gave her the receipt and a polite nod. No one asked why she looked like she'd just handed over her rent money. When she returned, Mr. Walters was still sitting upright, his gaze now lifted toward the rustling branches of the park trees. For a moment she thought perhaps he had fallen asleep, but as she approached he turned, his eyes sharpening as they fell on the cane in her hands. She held it out without ceremony, both hands cradling it like an offering. "It's not the same," she said quietly, "but it's strong and it'll get you where you're going." He didn't reach for it right away. Instead he looked at her the way a person looks at an unexpected sunrise. Full of awe, full of memory. "I can't repay you," he said. "Not a penny. I don't carry cards and I left my wallet at home." "I didn't ask you for anything," Amamira replied. "Some things just feel right to do." He finally took the cane, testing its balance against the pavement, then standing slowly with her help. The cane supported him better than the old one ever had. It didn't wobble, didn't creak. It was sturdy and sure. He looked at her again, blinking hard, his voice suddenly thick with emotion. "You have a rare heart," he repeated. "The kind that people write books about and never quite believe exists." She smiled, biting back the tiredness in her limbs and the sting in her wallet. "Well," she said, stepping back, "I think hearts like yours deserve something solid to lean on." He didn't wait for a thank you. She simply returned to her scooter, now tipped slightly under the weight of the spilled food, knowing she would have to explain herself to a manager who didn't believe in mercy or exceptions. But as she glanced back one last time, she saw Mr. Walters walking slowly into the park, his steps steadier, his back a little straighter, his head held higher, as if the city had granted him a second chance to walk without fear. And in that moment the cost didn't matter. The money, the time, the consequence, none of it mattered. What mattered was that somewhere in the storm of morning traffic and fractured concrete, she had chosen to pause, to lift, to give, and somehow it made the whole city seem softer. The next 3 days passed with the kind of weight only disappointment knows how to carry. Amamira returned to her routine, but something in her had shifted. Not because she expected anything in return, not because she thought the world would somehow notice what she had done, but because part of her, the part that always tried to keep hope alive under the crust of exhaustion, felt a little bruised. Her pay from that morning had been docked. The company's automated system didn't care that she'd saved a man from being trampled on the street, or that she'd given up a full day's earnings for a stranger's dignity. It only registered a missed delivery, a customer complaint, a violation of efficiency protocols. She hadn't even tried to contest it. What would she say? That she had chosen kindness over a sandwich deadline? She worked longer shifts to make up the difference, chasing time like it owed her something it never intended to repay. Each night she returned to the dim apartment she shared with her mother, who never once asked why Amamira seemed quieter, more tired, more hollow around the eyes. Her mother's health had improved slightly, but the medication was still rationed with care, and every pill felt like borrowed time. Yet even as Amamira wiped the counters, folded towels and rubbed the soreness from her legs, she never once regretted what she had done. On that bench she told herself it was enough to know she had done the right thing. It had to be. On the fourth morning, just after sunrise painted the buildings gold and the streets were still stretching awake, Amamira received a message through her delivery app. An alert that read simply, "Report to HQ floor 15 9 a.m. sharp." Her heart dropped. Headquarters was where terminations happened, not apologies. She rode the elevator with her stomach clenched, holding her helmet to her chest like a shield. The floor opened to a reception area she had never seen in person, only in pictures. Glass walls, leather seating, fresh orchids in vases so tall they seemed to belong in a cathedral. A woman with a calm voice and a nameplate that simply read Carol led her down a quiet hallway, past offices with names she didn't recognize, until they reached a door left slightly ajar. Inside was a man, impeccably composed, perhaps mid-40s, with silver at his temples and a gaze that carried both intellect and something gentler, more worn in. He stood when she entered, his tailored suit catching the morning light, and extended his hand without hesitation. "Amamira?" he asked. She nodded slowly, unsure whether to speak or brace for bad news. "My name is Darius Walter," he said, and the last name made her blink. Her mouth opened slightly but no words came. He motioned for her to sit. "I believe you met my father." The room softened instantly. The fear in her stomach dissolved into something unnameable. "He's your dad?" she asked carefully. He nodded. 87 years old. Still argues about Plato with his old colleagues. Refuses to carry a phone. And apparently believes crossing a New York street is an Olympic sport. He paused, then smiled, not as a businessman or executive but as a son. "He told me about you. 17 times to be exact over the last 2 days. 17, and that's not counting the times he just said, 'She reminded me why I still love this city.'" Amamira sat frozen, unsure what to say. Her hands folded tightly in her lap, and for once her instincts to explain, to minimize, to say it was nothing failed her. Walter walked to a small side table and picked up an envelope and a file. "My father doesn't ask for much. But when he looked at me yesterday and said, 'That young woman with the rare heart, you find her and you do right by her,' I knew I didn't need to ask questions. He slid the envelope across the table toward her. Inside is a medical fund, enough to cover your mother's treatment and then some. Amamira's breath caught like a sob, though she made no sound. She touched the envelope as if it might vanish if she gripped it too tightly. Mr. Walter, I didn't do it for, but he raised a hand, gentle, firm. I know why you did it. And that's exactly why it matters. He sat again, his expression shifting from personal to professional, though the warmth in his tone remained. You've been working under our third-party platform for almost a year. Effective today, I'd like to bring you on as a manager for our operations team in the Eastern District. You'll have benefits, stability, a future here if you want it. Amamira couldn't speak. Her voice felt trapped behind a storm of disbelief and gratitude. Walter, sensing her silence, added one more sentence, the kind that would stay with her for the rest of her life. You didn't just lift my father up off the street. You reminded him and me that the heart of this city isn't built in boardrooms. It's built in moments like yours. And in that quiet, window-lit room above the rush and clamor of the city, Amamira sat still for the first time in days, her hands trembling slightly as she held a future she hadn't dared to dream of, born not from ambition, not from luck, but from a single choice to help a stranger who'd needed her more than he knew. It had been nearly 2 weeks since that morning at headquarters, and though the city still pulsed with its usual rhythm, relentless horns, coffee carts hissing steam into the air, briefcases clutched like lifelines, something had quieted inside Amamira. Not in a way that dulled her energy or made her slower to smile, but in the way a long-held breath is finally released. She had stepped into her new role with the same humility that had guided her through alleyways and elevators and late-night deliveries, but now for the first time she wasn't just moving to survive, she was beginning to move with purpose. Her mother, now attending regular appointments at a clinic far better than any they had dared to imagine, had begun to speak with more ease, to hum softly in the mornings like she used to, back when life wasn't measured in pills and overdue notices. Their apartment felt warmer not because the heater finally worked properly, though it did, but because something unspoken between them had shifted. Hope, no longer a stranger at the door, had taken a seat at the table. Amamira worked long hours still, but now they were different. She oversaw routes, mentored younger drivers who didn't yet know how to fold time between deliveries, and brought quiet compassion to meetings where numbers once trumped names. She never spoke of what had led to this change unless asked, and even then she offered it gently, never grand. Sometimes, she'd say, you just do what's right. That's all. But among her team, stories still circulated about a girl who once stopped mid-shift to save an old man, about a broken cane and a new one bought with every dollar she had. These stories had grown roots, winding their way through office walls, whispered from dispatcher to driver like a city legend dressed in truth. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the skyline in ribbons of amber and the air softened with that tender hush before evening falls, Amamira found herself walking a familiar path toward the park near 56th. She hadn't meant to go there. She was simply passing by on her way to meet a new driver for orientation. But her steps slowed as she caught sight of the bench, the one by the curved iron fence where lilacs now bloomed in late spring, defiant. And there he was. Mr. Walters, dressed in his coat again, though the weather no longer demanded it, his cap pulled low but not so low she couldn't see the peaceful set of his jaw. In his hand, the cane she'd given him rested like an extension of his arm, well worn already, not from age but from use. And that, she thought, was exactly how it should be. She approached quietly, not wanting to startle him, but his voice greeted her before she could speak. I hoped you'd come, he said, his tone as warm as it had been that first morning, though steadier now, more anchored. I've been visiting this spot every other day. Figured sooner or later the city would bring you back around. She smiled, lowering herself onto the bench beside him, both of them watching the soft dance of leaves overhead. I didn't know if you'd be here, she admitted. I wasn't even sure you'd remember. He chuckled, the sound low and easy. I'm old, not forgetful. And when a moment brands itself into your bones the way that one did, well, it stays whether you want it to or not. They sat in silence for a while, not out of awkwardness, but respect for the noise they'd both escaped, for the stillness they shared now. Nearby, a little girl laughed as she chased pigeons across the path. A couple leaned into each other on a passing stroll. And somewhere in the distance, a saxophone player coaxed blues from brass like it was the only language that mattered. I never got to say thank you properly, he said finally, turning to look at her with those thoughtful, knowing eyes. Not just for helping me that day but for reminding me that kindness isn't extinct. That even in a city this big with this many moving parts, there are people like you who still stop. Amamira looked down, brushing her fingers over the smooth bench edge. I think I just did what anybody should have done, she said softly. But maybe not everybody would have, he nodded slowly. That's the difference. Most don't. Then after a pause he added, you didn't just lift me off the street. You lifted something in me that had gone quiet for a while. I'd spent too long feeling invisible, like the world had moved on without me. But that morning you saw me. That mattered more than you know. She felt the tears sting her eyes before she could stop them, but she blinked them away, not wanting the moment to be about sadness. Instead she reached into her bag and pulled out something she hadn't shown anyone, not even her mother. A laminated photo of the original cane snapped in half, next to the receipt for the new one. She kept them as a reminder not of loss, but of the choice she'd made that day, to give rather than retreat. I kept these, she said, handing it to him, not because I needed proof but because some days when things get loud again, I need to remember why quiet matters. He took the photo gently, studied it for a long moment, and then folded it into the inside pocket of his coat. Well then, he said, his voice thick with something that felt like a blessing, now I'll carry your reminder with me too. And as the sky deepened into that soft indigo that only comes once the city lights begin their glow, they remained there, two figures on a park bench, bound not by blood or contract or obligation, but by something far more enduring. The echo of one morning's kindness and the way it had stitched together two very different lives in the heart of a city that, for all its noise and speed, had paused just long enough to let one act of grace take root. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.